Good afternoon. How many of you have been to a meeting before? Actually, I should say, who hasn't? Okay. This is an iterative process, which means I repeat myself a lot, which is good for you, not so good for the people who've been coming. But we don't always speak about the same thing. Often, we're far enough along that I can show you a proposal that you can imagine and respond to. You can say, I like it, I don't like it, I'm disappointed. Mostly the developers have been telling us, the four principal landowners have been telling us what they like or don't like, okay, about it. They've been the principal responders. One of the, I'm probably increasingly this becomes about developers. There's no question that in the end, they not only have to build where we all want to live, work, and play. Live, work, and shop. The play, the city takes care of. The city does the play, but the developers do everything else. And so if you don't bring them along, it just doesn't happen. And you have a kind of a double-edged sword here. This place is so well run, popular, you name it, you know better than I do, that actually anything sells and rents. Anything sells and rents. So one of the problems we have to confront is why would they do a better job? They don't have to do a better job. You just sort of put it out there. People even wait for it. Like I understand the builders here will actually take an order before building it and they'll build it for you. They don't even have to have the product ready. So one of the problems I'm confronting, it's very abstract, is that nobody has to do a good job. You know, if they build a shopping center, you'll shop there because there's so little shopping. In fact, $410 million of your money actually shops elsewhere. It's spent elsewhere, which is a disaster. There's such a housing shortage, affordable housing shortage, that 37% of the 18 to 35 age group is living at home, which is almost like a TV show joke. You know, too many older folks living at home. So anything would rent. Now there's a double side to this, which is what we're trying to do. Because everything is going to sell or rent anyway, why can't they take some risks? Okay, it's only in the weak market that you don't take risks. So we're trying to push the envelope as to why shouldn't they shouldn't innovate. Okay, that's the fundamental question. And there's no incentive for them to innovate because it's a lot more work. Okay, it's a lot more work, and among the work they have to do is that the bankers are so conservative and they have so little time to actually look at a project that they just want to dumb down. They want to know, here's my checklist of 6 items, and if it meets it, I'll give you money, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. And they have very, very simplistic rules. How many rooms a hotel has, how many keys a hotel has, how many seats a restaurant has, how much traffic a shopping center has to be in front of it. They have 10 minutes to lend you, $10 million. Because they're going to invest $1 billion in a month. So they're not going to look at anything. They're not going to visit anything. It just has to meet the checklist. So behind developers, who in fact are usually pretty smart they're interesting and smart people, there's a set of people, and I hope none of them are present, who are really, really dumb, and they're the bankers. They're not personally stupid, it's just the system makes them stupid. And so the developers actually have to become very conservative. So one of the things we're trying to do is to say, how can we persuade these developers to do certain things that you all want? How do we get them to build compounds, affordable housing, places that you can actually start businesses in, the kind of things I've been hearing about. And there's a very lucky thing that has happened. The system of getting permits here is so incredibly painful, long. It takes, these developers have been waiting sometimes decades to get a permit. Decades. Certainly years, many years. It is so painful and arbitrary to get a permit, and on top of it, you have the most outrageous sum of charges. There's this charge of $60,000, and the other charge of $30,000, and the other charge of $5,000, etc. And it could very easily be $100,000 a unit before you even pay anybody to design it or to do the engineering. Okay, so I love that, because what happens is the greatest reward we can offer them is to actually remove the pain. We can actually say, you guys can do whatever you want, okay, and continue suffering the pain, because I ain't going to relieve it. If you're going to build the same old crap you've been building, please meet Deborah. Okay, here's your code. Okay, let me tell you something. This code is the code, is an unintelligible, contradictory, arbitrary, complete piece of junk. Your code. I couldn't have come up with a better one. Here. So what I'm telling the developers is, fine, you do what you want. Welcome to the code, welcome to Deborah, welcome to the elected officials that change every 2 years, good luck. Okay? But it's like really a bad business plan. However, what we want to offer, and by the way, I'm a private sector planner. I've always made money for developers. You know, I'm not a crazy ass, you know, idealist or anything. My father and grandfather were developers, and exactly how it's done. I participate in development. But what's on offer here is we're going to do a plan which is a superb plan, superb, uncompromised, absolutely superb, that everybody that I've shown to loves. And in fact, 2 of the 4 developers also love. 2 of the large landowners also love it. And we're going to say, if you follow this plan, you're permitted as of right. Just crank up the bulldozers, start deciding what the yacht you're going to buy, or what house in France you like. Okay, because you know, you can actually make money time certain. If you don't, right, you get to do this. And so the first thing, what I'm talking about today, is we're going to actually design a code, because actually the mayor who's here now. Hi. Glad you made it. This talk's for you. Because I'm going to talk about code. Okay, so the mayor is a perfectly reasonable human being who is actually has told me that actually she doesn't understand anything about this code. Which actually, the truth is, nobody understands anything about this code. She's just honest. Okay, she's absolutely honest. It's constantly being amended. It's an unbelievable. It was junk to begin with. You know why you can't reform it? Because if you remove the bad stuff, there's nothing there that's worth keeping. So you can't take the fat off, because actually the skeleton doesn't even work. It's superb. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to keep the code in place, and the code we write goes like this. They say there's an ordinance for this city, and there's a decision tree. The first thing you can do is you can decide to continue with conventional suburban design, CSD, such as you've been doing there, or you can actually do a TND, traditional neighborhood design, okay, which is based on this regulating plan. And this morning I dictated a code, 2.5 pages, okay, that can be understood even by a busy mother, you know, between whatever it is mothers do. Okay. I know you're an engineer, but I just learned that. But it has to be very, very simple. Not only so that actually it can be actually smoothly done, but that actually you all can supervise it and understand it, because a lot of the NIMBYism that goes on is because this thing is just really, you can't trust it. Because you can't trust this, you've got to come in all the time. Every time something comes up for development, you have to come in to actually make sure somebody isn't getting screwed. And that's what happens when you have old codes like that. By the way, I have to disclose one thing. Most American cities have codes like this. You're not superbly bad. One thing I can say about yours is somebody actually reset it in decent typography. It's nicely laid out. Some people have the old mimeograph sheets, you know, from the 60s. So your code looks good. It looks orderly. It's a mess. Don't let it fool you. Okay, so today I want to talk about, any questions about this? I can stand to be corrected. Did I say anything that was inaccurate? Okay, so, one of the...
you did, there was the decade timeline. I don't think that was a result of the code. I think that maybe partially, but also the market and being able to
oh, you had the downturn.
Build something. The downturn and change decisions. lack of a clear vision, I think.
Lack of a clear vision.
Yep.
Got it. But actually, the downturn was a long time.
And I would say it's the codes,
Ah,
plural.
okay.
There was a number of them, and it didn't get better as they went.
One of the things that that Florida had an incredible planning system they put in 1990, and the governor took it apart almost 25 years later. And all the people involved, the experts, said what brought this down, because it was really superb, and they said lack of intragovernmental coordination. What happened was that the public works people were not talking to the schools people, they were not talking to the tax people, they were not talking, to the highway people. It was incredible. Everybody was on their own, and actually nothing made sense. The school was out here, the highway was over here, so the developers were going crazy, and eventually had to be thrown out. So I'm very aware of intragovernmental coordination being a problem. Actually, we had a conversation on some small elements of that regard. You know, the pathetic thing about developers is because the government's uncoordinated, what they do for a job is coordinate government. They actually negotiate with this person and the traffic engineer, and then they negotiate with the person with the setbacks and the person with the water, and they're solving the problem for one project, and it needs to be solved comprehensively. It's what? It's your turn to do what?
Herd cats.
Herd cats. Oh, herd cats within government. Yeah. Well, the developers are cat herders. The contradictions are extraordinary. You contradictory standards, all this. Okay, so what I want to talk about is codes today, and why codes exist and how they got into trouble. Okay, what happened? When the and I have a series of illustrations and slides, but I'd like to speak abstractly first. Most of what you see in America that you love was not built with codes. The pathetic thing is that the nicest old neighborhood in downtown, which I visited this morning, was not built with a code. Okay, none of the cities that we love the most were built with a code. The codes emerged very late. The zoning codes, they weren't even legal till 1927. So everything you see before 1927, which is mostly everything that's really good, was not built with a code. When there were some abuses, and so the first health and safety codes came in to make sure that rooms had windows and so forth. Those were earlier. Okay, so we need to separate zoning codes from health and safety codes. They have since exploded, but they were originally located because actually uses. If you look at the history of New York City, there were constant uses that actually would decrease real estate value. You would actually build a nice mansion, and then somebody would build a pigsty next to it. And honestly, exactly that kind of thing happened. So zoning began to separate noxious uses. What everybody was interested in is actually maintaining real estate value. Okay? One of the most noxious things that happened in the 20s was parking. Okay, the automobile, if you look at the early photographs, there was no parking. And they would just park everywhere, and the cities became kind of parking slums, and the suburbs became parking slums. And so things became very, very associated to parking, which then people began counting. Oh, parking, how many square feet do you have? And what do you do in those square feet? Right? And how many patients do you have? So that I know that a doctor needs 10 per whatever, but a restaurant needs 10 per X, but if you actually are, and the precision is incredible. Like, if you actually stand up and order food, but sit down to have it served, is actually a different amount of parking than if you just simply sit down, believe it or not. And so you get even, for example, in the flexibility, you have to know ahead of time what everything's going to be. And if it isn't going to happen, you have to come back and get it redone. Parking and then traffic, okay? And most of the NIMBYism, and it's really, really boring, because I go to any city, what's your problem? Traffic congestion. Okay, whether they have it or not, that's their problem. And then the other thing is parking, which actually is they want more, and the more there is, they hate it. So the same person says, "Sir, stop paving America. There's not enough parking." And so the level of discourse as to what the city should be, your elected officials stand there night after night, okay, elected, to think about the future, normally just dealing with very mundane problems that are caused by what the automobile has created. But there have always been two Americas. Okay, right now, you're all experts in planning. In fact, you're more expert than you think, because you've experienced both the traditional walkable neighborhoods, of which you have a few, not too many. But if you travel at all, you generally go to places that are wonderful. You know, you go to New York, oh, I love New York, I love Key West, I love Santa Barbara, I love the walkable places. You know very well what a walkable city is like, or a walkable town. You know. You also know what an automobile-oriented one is, because most of you live in one. So you're experts in both. The only thing I can add to this is I need to clarify for you what the difference is, so that you don't actually hybrid them. Because what we're designing here is primarily, this town center, we were asked to design what is primarily a pedestrian-oriented place. And if you come in and start asking, where's the parking, or where's this kind of street, or all this stuff that you have been trained to ask, you will kill the pedestrianism. You're hybriding the two. The code that we propose that you have gives developers the chance to actually do the automobile-oriented one, which at least does that well. It's at least fully automobile-oriented in the pedestrian one. What doesn't work is when you mix them. And some of the real failures that I've seen are shopping centers and subdivisions that actually combine the worst of both. Let me give you an example. Okay, streets are really wide, right? But we're against cul-de-sacs, because cul-de-sacs actually don't contribute to the dispersal of traffic, right? The developers build the asphalt and they load the traffic on the cul-de-sac, but that investment in asphalt is not dispersing the traffic. That traffic is still going 100% out to some arterial somewhere. So the investment in asphalt doesn't solve the traffic. Okay, that's what a cul-de-sac does. So planners say no more cul-de-sacs. Actually, this town has very few cul-de-sacs. Very few, because you heard about that. But if you haven't also reduced the street width to slow down the traffic, you have the worst of both worlds. You have through traffic that actually goes fast. You see, it's just absolutely typical. And there's a lot of places that are really miserable. You've eliminated the cul-de-sacs, but the old public works manual wasn't changed, so the traffic goes too quickly. And this can happen all the time. And you can kill retail, and you can kill, it's better, okay, just build a strip shopping center. We know that works. But don't go around building a main streets that kinda have, because all it does is actually create inconvenient parking and a not very pleasant walking experience. You've got to clean it up. And so that's my lesson. The way to do this is to have two codes that don't mix them. There's this one and that one, and you don't mix them. Now we've been asked, and we have the privilege of actually drawing a plan that tries to pull together a very large area, you know, actually larger than Pearl Street. It's really big. Into a town center, and this is the last chance you have, because this is where the two streets meet. If it doesn't happen here, it just doesn't happen. You will never have a proper town center. You'll have a historic one, but not the town center that we all love, that you can walk to your daily needs, etc. Okay? So, unfortunately, in this plan, we can't hybrid it. We have to be very hard on each of the landowners to say, you know, if you want to build suburban sprawl, because that's what the bankers tell you to do. Can I have that? That's what the bankers, as you can see, I'm falling asleep. If you want what the bankers want you to do, this is a huge town that has an area that is, what's the area unbuilt yet? It's like, do you know the number of square miles?
20 square miles.
Okay, you have 20 square miles, go do it somewhere else. And actually, some of the landowners here literally have 10 other sites elsewhere where they can build what they're used to building. This is unique. This one has a different destiny. Okay? But on the other hand, we don't want to just be hard on everybody and say, you guys have to do this or you're screwed. You actually, what we want to reward the 4 or 5 landowners here with saying, you're permitted as of right. Okay? And furthermore, we're not going to ask you to waste money on a lot of things that don't actually accrue to the actual people that are going to live there. Because there's a lot of charges that go into the atmosphere. You know, I don't know where all that money goes. I don't know why, there's a lot of things that actually are very costly that are not helping the people. They may be helping accountants somewhere. I mean, I don't want to become an expert on where all that money goes, but you really need whatever profit, whatever slack this project has, should be reinvested right back here. In this area, the best parks, the best benches, the best, you know, all the public facilities should be first rate instead of floating off somewhere to pay for, I don't know, trying to save climate change, whatever the other agendas are here. And it's not my job to know, but we want actually the city to commit to actually investing right back here. The greatest reward for a developer is predictability. They want to know what they can build, they want to know what the neighbor is going to build, and they want to know when they can build it. Okay? Because you know what? The residents want to know. This isn't interchangeable. Like when you build an apartment here, it isn't just, hey guys, this is 700 square feet for $1,200. No, this is 700 square feet for $1,200 that you can walk to your daily needs. And your parents can live nearby. And there's a whole agenda of things that these developers can offer. Huge number of amenities that are not on offer everywhere else. And they are going to actually do very well. And we've built 45 projects now. Built, we've designed 300, 45 built. By the way, what happened to the other 350, 250, right, that weren't built? That's something that, I want to tell you something. You better get serious because the mortality rate for these plans is really high. Okay, this is much more likely to not be built than to be built by 6x. That's why we've done 300 and only built 45. Now, 45 happens to be tons more than anybody else has done. You know, 45 new towns have been built, okay, like this one. But nevertheless, there's another 250 that were not built. And we can go into why that happens, how it happens. Now, sometimes it's just that 2 partners, one of them is a drunk and the whole thing fell apart. You know, there are no lessons. And some of them is a recession. There's a lot of recession. But here's another thing. Some developers go under because you ask them to build too much infrastructure too early. Right? That's really expensive. It's really dumb. You're among those who do that. Okay, this town asked the developers to build all the roads before they can sell. In fact, probably a couple of years before they can sell anything. That's incredibly dopey. That's just money down the drain. So they're, you know, we don't want to make life harder for them. You know, so that's the kind of thing we need to rebalance. So we need a little bit of timing. I would love to come out of here in just a few months with a master plan that all the developers like, and that actually there's no further process. It doesn't come up, you know, you will have had your discussion with the elected officials. We will have negotiated with all the public works and everything. The NIMBYs will have their say, and they'll be made happy. But when they come in, don't say, oh, guys, please meet the NIMBYs. You know, let's just torture you again. There should be no, absolutely no, just clean, let's go. And by the way, they can all build simultaneously, so you can see this in our lifetime. Okay? Because actually, otherwise, it does take about 25 years to build these things out, even at the best. So that's what I propose. I dictated a code this morning. It's frankly 2.5 pages. It's going to be 5. And it's going to be perfectly intelligible from everybody. Okay? Now, I want to just say a few things about codes and then have a lesson, could we go, on what the difference is. Okay? This is the lecture that I've given about 1,000 times, and if you don't like it, you can see it on YouTube. You can see me with dark hair. You know, I hate talking about it because I'm tired of it. But it needs to be understood, okay? There's a reason to do traditional urbanism, go back, and that is, one is to preserve nature, and the other one is actually for the sake of the humans. Everything that you see here is a bunch of happy humans. Look at them. Okay, they have wonderful civic buildings, young people, older people, nice walkable streets. You know, there's a cop here, and here's nature, actually pristine. They go together. If you want to save nature, you need to make cities that are so wonderful that people who want to live in the suburbs are losers. Why wouldn't you want to live in downtown Boulder? Oh, because I can't afford it. I get it. Okay, we want to build a place that doesn't need an urban boundary because the cities are great. By the way, not a single urban boundary has ever worked. They keep expanding. The only thing that works is when people love their cities. So we want to make a place that's good enough so that people are happy to do this instead of that. Okay, next. There's also something else that's happened. This is that I live in a development in new town called Coral Gables. 1922, it was the largest new town in the world at the time, and there were dozens in America. Okay, there were actually 740 garden cities laid out between the war and all over the world. Okay, they were all done by developers. They're all private sector. Okay. These developers that build developments that were like towns are heroes. Like this is the guy who did mine, George Merrick, and there are statues to him, their biographies, his poems are published. Okay. Now a developer is somebody you hate, you're embarrassed to even know. What happened? The difference is that the developers of this generation built towns. They were town founders. The people who build the sprawl are actually sprawl developers, and nobody likes the result, even though you live in them. So the developer has been incredibly admired, the town founders, that every town knows who founded it. Those towns actually love their developers. All of our clients who have actually built a town properly are beloved. And furthermore, they get permits to do other towns. Like Robert Davis of Seaside. People beg him, can you please come to our town? So basically they reverse the bad reputation for a good one, and the pattern is not profit. Do not ever say that the problem is profit. Because every building that's worth a damn was made for profit. Okay? Very few were not. In fact, the worst buildings are the government buildings. You know, the affordable housing and so forth. The profit is not the problem is the pattern. And the pattern is either suburban sprawl or traditional neighborhood. Okay, so that's the difference. Next. This is what suburban sprawl looks like. It's a very simple animal, and that's its strength. Okay? It consists of housing subdivisions that are monocultures. They have one building type, and you can actually count. You can actually say, each one of these houses generates 11 car trips a day, and the toilet is flushed this many gallons, and this is the tax rate. Everybody loves the numbers. But it's a real dumb beast, but boy, it's easy to administer. These all have, okay. So these are places where you only live. Then you have shopping centers, which are places where you only shop. Nobody lives here. Okay, and by the way, these are all useful. See that? There's the supermarket, the Target, the hardware store. Don't think you don't know it, you don't love these stores or need them. It's just that they're not assembled. Next. And then you have office parks where you work, which are also separate, but you can count. You can count what they are. And then you have your high schools. That is a Florida high school. Check that. Why are there so many cars? Because the kids are not socially viable without a car. You can't get a date. Okay, let's just get it down to that. So you get a high school that has this much parking. The problem with pavement is that every car in America generates at least 4 parking spaces. They want it home, they want it at work, they want it this, they want it that. So we have an enormous number of cars, which actually are kind of nice. Most people love their cars. The cars are not the problem. It's the parking lots. Okay, they also make extremely antisocial, unwalkable spaces. So in America, in the suburbs, next, if you notice that they're not assembled. You see, this shopping center is used by these people, no doubt about it. There's no connection. So when you need to actually buy something, you need to go out of your subdivision, right, all the way out, get on the arterial, collector and arterial, plug up capacity there, and come right back, and you can easily be a quarter mile away that you can walk, but you can't get there. The planning system in code is like this. They continually clip the connections. These two streets you have, which are actually only a 2-laner and a 4-laner, right? Right there, it's a 4-laner and a 2-laner. That's nothing, okay? Your famous Pearl Street, downtown is a 4-laner, and people are crossing it without even looking. We were actually this morning saying, this is really pedestrian oriented. You know, we almost killed a couple of people because they don't look, which means they're so comfortable. They're so comfortable. I didn't kill him, he almost killed him. They're so comfortable walking that you say, wow, a 4-laner isn't the problem. One of the problems is, there are two problems with your streets. First of all, you don't allow parking on them. And unless you have parking, none of your sidewalks will ever be used because the layered parking protects you from the potential, the fear and unpleasantness of cars moving quickly. The parking also slows down the traffic tremendously because there's friction. Okay? So it's not your 2-laner or 4-laner, it's the fact that they're considered collectors or arterials. And the manifestation is that we're having a really hard time actually getting intersection spacing at less than 700 feet. Do you know what the intersection spacing is in Manhattan? 200 feet. You know what it is in Portland? 200 feet. So why does this have to be 700 here? Because you're using the wrong manual. You're using a Suburban manual. Right? Now we're not crazy enough to think we're going to reform the people who design your arterials. Therefore, get used to this, we're giving our back to those streets. Your Erie and your County Road, your, what's it called? County Line Road are hopeless. They're hopeless. They will never be crossable, they'll never be pleasant. So what we're doing is instead of actually saying, oh, you cute little roads, you're going to be okay, no, they're uncrossable, we're giving their back to them and internalizing the good streets. The big problem we're having is that our good streets aren't even allowed to connect often enough because we're not allowed to cross them. Where did they get the idea that only 700 feet is the minimum between two lights? When in Manhattan it's 200 feet. When in Portland it's 200 feet. And everybody loves Manhattan, everybody loves Portland, everybody loves the places that have 200-foot spacing. It's the wrong manual. And as I said, unless you beg me, I'm not going to correct that manual. Because I'm not going to fight your traffic engineer. We're just going to inherit the idiocy and actually pretend it's not there. But we do want crossings more often than 700 feet. Okay, so that's kind of laying the gauntlet down. Yes, the first thing we're challenging you to is we're going to compromise because we haven't got time to fix the Department of Transportation. Now let's look at this. One monoculture and another. This is a town. This is a perfectly normal American town. Happens to be in New England, could be anywhere. Okay? How does it work socially? Well, there's a green in the middle and there's civic buildings. Okay? And then around the town, particularly here, there's a kind of building type that has shops below and you live above. And what's good about that is that actually, because the real estate is primarily commercial, the people above pay less. It's cheap. It's almost free real estate. Because really it's there for the shop, but hey, why not have apartments above? But two things are interesting. First of all, not only is it affordable, but the people who live here are often young. And what do young people want? They want to be where the action is. Because their job is to actually sample DNA. They need to find a partner, they need to meet as many people as possible, okay, so that they get a good couple. That is their job, and that only happens downtown. Here in the suburbs, as you know, nothing's happening. Okay, I don't know, There's a coffee house that closes at 4. So they have to go downtown where there's a lot more DNA to actually, that's why they go to college. Most American kids go to college to increase their chances for that. Okay, so you're here young, and then let us say that you successfully mate and you breed. What happens is you move out here to the middle ground where you can get a smaller house with a yard, which kids really love. And you can walk, but even the kid can walk to their daily needs. Right here. The house in an American neighborhood is a single-family house. We're not against single-family houses. But the single-family house needs to be able to walk to a neighborhood, the neighborhood center. And by the way, the kids love it. They love it, to be able to have the freedom. Now, in America, at least it used to be, that when you played your cards right, you accumulated wealth. You know, you lived long, you worked long enough, and you accumulated this and whatever, the real estate happened. And then you wanted to reward yourself with a really big spread. Okay? And the house got big and the yard got bigger. It's one of the American rewards for working so hard. And those are fine, and they're out here. Right? So there's a transect from most urban to most rural. The big house with the big yard. And then you start getting older. And you say, hey, I really love my big house. It doesn't make that much sense anymore. The kids are out. And I've already shown it to all my friends, and they're really jealous about how big and how many dining places I'll have indoor, whatever it is, you know, that McMansions offer. And then they say, but you know what? It's not so great driving to everything. And then eventually you say, I can't even drive to everything even if I wanted to, which we all know about in Florida. And then you get all your savings, and you go to a retirement community that charges you $10,000 a month to treat you like a high school student, to feed you in a cafeteria, and take you in a little bus to the mall. It's idiotic. It's completely idiotic system. What they used to do in the old days is they would go from here and say, fine, and then they would get themselves a really good apartment downtown. One of the things that you find in all sorts of cool towns, and a lot of American cities are becoming cool, is you find apartment buildings designed for older folk that are really nice, nothing affordable about them. And the older folk come in, and then they walk to their daily social needs. And this is a completely organic relationship. You who become experts here, and up here in the West, everybody's an expert on, you know, endangered species, and they know all about all the creatures that live in nature. They know almost nothing about humans and human habitats. Because if you see out there, forgive me for saying this, that is not actually a successful human habitat. It does certain things and people like it, but it has nothing to do with the transect of younger, older, etc. that this represents. By the way, this has nothing to do with poorer people. It has to do with the younger people have less money, and older people have more money, and younger people need a nightlife, and older people don't, and that kind of thing. It's all human. Don't blame me for this. Okay? If that doesn't work, it ain't my fault. Okay? Because you say, well, Ronnie's so cruel to us. Oh, he's really insulted us. No, I didn't insult you. I'm just saying this is the way it is. This is the natural human habitat. And actually, when it is on offer, it's always incredibly expensive. And that's why developers actually do our projects. Some of them don't even have good hearts. They just know where the money is. You know, and these actually outperform all. But I can give you show. They always outperform the competition. Next, this is what it is. This is downtown Coral Gables. Look at how the zoning is confetti-like. Okay, there's all sorts of colors. This is City Hall. That's a church. That's a school. This is all mixed use, all of it. Every last bit of that, and it's much bigger, is mixed use. This is residential, single-family houses. This is townhouses, okay? This was done by the developer for profit. This is what the plan looks like, a real planning looks like. This is what we're going to offer. We're going to offer something that's very, very finely minced. This is what your plans look like now. You have a collector, and you have a pod that is for shopping center, office park, houses that sell for 100,000, houses that sell for 300,000, houses that sell for 500,000, and a school. Why don't you draw the streets in here? Because they don't actually play a part in distributing the traffic, right? All those little streets you have, they just give you access to the lots. They don't distribute the traffic they create. The traffic all hits the arterial, which is why in your absurdly low-density town that's only half built, you already have a traffic congestion problem. Do you realize that?
Yeah.
Okay, how did you manage that? The thing's empty, look at that. How do you manage the traffic of a metropolis and essentially the culture of a cow town? Because it's not like you have an opera house or anything here. No, you have the traffic of a metropolis. And it's because, it's not your fault. If you had the chance, you'd build the opera house. You know what you're doing is building arterials. Okay? I want to bear something in mind. The developers are paying for building the streets. They're doing their job. It's just that your planning doesn't allow the streets to connect. So the investment is actually non-operational. You are forcing them to not solve the problem they're causing. It ain't their fault. Right now, I'm being told I got to clip my streets because some traffic engineer that you've hired actually wants a 700-foot intersection spacing, as if this were, I don't know, Washington, I mean, I don't know a place that has 7-foot intersection spacing. It's absurd. It should be 200 feet. So if you don't fix that, you're going to have a traffic congestion problem. It's not a widening problem. It's not a density problem. It's your engineers killing you. He's strangling you. By the way, it's not the engineer, because he's probably a really nice guy. It's his book. The book becomes his brain. Because you take him to the downtown Pearl Street, your engineer, and you say, he's telling you, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. You take him downtown, and he says, tell me this doesn't work. Okay, I've done this. How come it works here? He says, no, no, this doesn't work. He said, you're looking that it works. It doesn't work. That's because his brain has been replaced by the green book. Surgery. So don't hassle him, just change his book. He'll just very happily administer something else. But you can't really build what we're building with the same regime that you have. So that's an agenda we have. We will show you. We have one of the best engineers in the country, Paul Crabtree, next door. He knows how to talk to the engineers. But ultimately, he'll make sense. Everything we do, you can see in downtown Boulder. There's nothing odd. But it takes up the political power to tell the engineer, hey, listen to this. Or at the very least, download the latest book. Part of the problem is that you're working from some old manual. You don't even download the latest. Most cities, I don't know for a fact, don't even download the latest version. They're working back in the 60s or something with some old book with all the little yellow tags marked. They don't want to change that. Next. 2 downtowns. This is Alexandria, marvelous, walkable. This is Virginia Beach nearby. Okay? Look at the number of lanes in this intersection. I can't remember when last
Now
time.
we get 11.
Thank you. How do you know?
I
Thank you.
used this slide before.
Okay. So, 11 lanes. Notice that there is a sidewalk. Notice that there's a tree preservation ordinance. Right? Notice that there's a sign ordinance. No ugly signs. But no pedestrian has even been here that wasn't an indigent. You know, somebody that actually was a loser, that couldn't be, can't afford a car. And actually, if they're well-dressed, you feel sorry for them and you stop to pick them up. May I help them? Okay? This is what the code creates. Okay, it's perfectly administered. The parking is for, you know, the Thursday before Thanksgiving. Actually, all these people with the big boxes, that's the Sears anyway. Like, they're all wrong. It's not like, you know, they know what they're doing. They just know what they're doing for a decade. Yes, this is what works now, but they're going to leave you behind with a bunch of empty stores. And I hope you already know that all this stuff is crashing. It's just crashing, so don't let them do it anymore because you'll be saddled with empty things. This, on the other hand, can actually be designed temporarily to be future city blocks. Do you see this? Do you see these walkways? You can actually put the infrastructure in already from the beginning and actually urbanize it later. So you can actually save their ass later when they actually go bankrupt. They still have valuable real estate that they can do. This is not theoretical. We did it in Kentlands, and the parking lots are now actually urbanized. And everybody who fought us is now making a lot of money, which of course is typical. Okay, this is Alexandria. What happens here is that there are lots and lots of streets. It even has a tourist load, a tremendous tourist load. And the thing about these streets is that they're complex organisms. On them are buildings. Notice Notice that there are no buildings on this. The buildings are all set back. Okay? Buildings are on the street. The streets have sidewalks, trees, parked cars, and moving cars. They're very complex organisms. This one only has moving cars. It doesn't even have trees. You notice that in your famous greenways you don't have trees because they actually kill people, apparently. So nothing is allowed. Those streets that you're building, you kind of have a sidewalk no one has ever used. You know, and no trees, nothing. And unless, by the way, these two streets, unless you have cars on them parked, you will not actually get the cars to slow down or have pedestrians. But why would anybody park on them? You haven't got any buildings on them. So that's the whole problem. Everything here, the street is assembled as a public space. This is a traffic sewer that serves only one purpose at a tremendous cost. They're both town centers next to each other. By the way, I gave this lecture this is a famous pair of slides, much published. They've actually fixed this. If you go to Virginia Beach now, you can't find it. They were sufficiently insulted by my lectures. I mean, it took 25 years.
How they fix it?
It's not there anymore, I can't find it. Anyway, next. Okay, so let's talk about these two things. Everything about this is legal. The number of parking spaces is absolutely correct. The size of the parking spaces, the drainage of the parking spaces, the quality of the paint, the lighting, everything here is legal. Everything here, everything is illegal. This is Sonoma, California. Okay? You can't back out like this. This is a major street. You can't have mixed use like this. The setbacks don't work. Nothing about this is legal. And yet people commute. In fact, they fly to go to Sonoma. Okay, people actually flee this place. They don't even want any more of these around, even though they're useful. Okay, how is it, and I'm talking about your code, how is it that, this is mostly fire code now and stuff, how is it that this is legal and this is illegal? When actually they both coincide. Right now, this isn't, some people say, hey, these guys, oh, this is now, that was then. They're real humans now living and loving here. It's not then, it's now. So what we're proposing is as little as possible of this and as much as possible of this. But we can't actually bear the burden of actually explaining, okay, that this can actually exist and you can back out. There's also another problem people make. They spend a lot of money on ornamental civic improvements. Beautiful trash cans, beautiful lights, gazebos, all this swags everywhere, flowers hanging from the, it doesn't matter. You know what this is? You see that trash can? It's an oil drum. Okay, the best places are tough. There's sidewalks with concrete. You don't have to spend money perfuming your infrastructure. It doesn't help. There are tons of dead Main Street that have beautiful, beautiful lamps and gazebos and everything. It's not about that. It's about the definition of the space. Now, by the way, asphalt sidewalk, right? It's not brick, but it's Sonoma. Like, how did they do this? And by the way, not far from here is are perfectly worthless shopping centers that no one wants to be at. All we're asking is that there's evidence that this works really well. And what's surreal is they say, well, you're so theoretical. You're so theoretical. I'm not theoretical. The people of the books are theoretical. The people who say this doesn't work because the book says it doesn't work. Those are the theoretical guys. The traffic engineers are the theoretical guys. This is the real thing. Next. Now let's talk about mixed use and why people don't like it. It was very hard to find two shops that were similar enough. Notice that they're both hideous colors. Okay, orange, blue. This is a beloved neighbor. It's in Georgetown. This destroys real estate value like a small atomic power plant. Okay, everything around this is berm. Nobody wants to live there. I happen to know that place. No one wants to live near the 7-Eleven. They both sell useful things. They both sell the stuff you need between the big supermarket things. This doesn't replace supermarket. This doesn't replace supermarket. But I use these places. They have eggs. They have milk. They have all sorts of things. The difference is that this one's up on the sidewalk. This one has asphalt in front. Okay? It's the type. It's the building type. And there's another thing too. It's architecture. This looks very, very different than a house. this looks very similar to a house. One of the reasons that it's important to code this style of buildings is not to make them more beautiful, but to make them more compatible. One of the reasons we bother to code style is that it's camouflage. It actually allows a shop or an office building to be close to a townhouse and a house. If they all look different, it's much harder to get them to work together. And that's why we actually write codes to harmonize. It's not that we're aesthetic ayatollahs, you know, it's just the way we get these things to happen. This is a very hostile neighbor, this is a welcome neighbor. Could not be more different. And yet, here you have it, they both have the same bad taste in color, but look, it still works. Next. Now, about income, how do we blend income? There's a huge class problem in this country, which I can analyze, but it manifests itself in real estate. Developers have a hard time selling less expensive units close to expensive units. And it's not their fault, it's the buyer that doesn't like it. It's not that they're, you know, it's the buyer. They don't like, nobody wants to live next to a townhouse when you pay $5 million for a big house. The reason is that we actually design in homogeneous pods like this. Every house here, these are very old slides, okay? Notice how I'm calling them slides. This slide, this was $370,000. This is $200,000. These are quadruplexes for $100,000. Okay? The pecking order actually. Now, I have a headline. The reason I chose this. See, there's an empty lot here. I have a newspaper article that says subdivision panics because of affordable housing. Somebody was actually offering to build a $200,000 house in a subdivision of $400,000, and it caused a panic, as if $200,000 wasn't fully middle class. The reason is that developers actually sell snobism. If you are here, you are actually better off, and possibly even a better person than this one. And the pecking order goes like that all the way to the inner city, and the mobile home parks where the real losers are. And we have created that, and developers have exacerbated that. They actually thrive on it, and they do a lot of snobism in their advertising. By the way, my father was a developer, and very much committed to snobism as a sales tool. He loved it. He said it really works. Okay, now, so this is what you're seeing here. And we've actually taught people to panic when you talk about affordable housing nearby. This is Georgetown. There's a huge variety of housing type here. But what happens is, instead of being separated like this, they confront each other. You see, we use our streets to separate. On this side residential, on this side commercial. On this side townhouses, on this side single family houses. It's so bad that sometimes they have to give their back to each other with fences. Okay? It's exactly the opposite of what happened in traditional towns. This street in Georgetown has mansions facing each other. It's the most expensive. This is Dunbarton. These are very, very expensive mansions. These are townhouses of medium expense facing each other, and these are apartment buildings facing each other. Right? Three enormously differences, but the thing is that instead of cutting it on the street, they cut it on the alley. If you do it on the alley, what happens behind you is much less important. It's what you face. Now, you don't realize that unless you begin studying aerial photographs, and then you see how often the cuts are in the alley. And yet, what we do here is we create real estate, which every developer here actually owns. Everyone we're working with is owning opposite sides of the street. So I'll do a shopping center here, you do an office park there. Just look at the intersection out here. Office park here, shopping center there, housing there, townhouses in the third place, and they face each other in a very hostile stance. It's very incoherent. The zoning should always cut in the backyard so that the fronts face life. And this you see in all the traditional towns. By the way, I am completely convinced that this book of yours actually exacerbates that situation, because they love being able to count. How can you count the traffic when the traffic impact of a townhouse is different from the traffic impact of a large house? I mean, doesn't a townhouse have only 7 cars a day, trips, and the full house 11 count? I mean, how can you do any planning if we can't count cars? I mean, planning is counting cars and then counting sewage impact. I mean, that's what planning is. It's been reduced to that, with all due respect, but it ain't much more than that. And this actually is exacerbated by this code. It isn't just the developers. It's actually the way you think about cities and where you draw your zoning lines right on the arterials or on the streets. Next. Another thing also that happens is there's a, you don't do too much of this to that, but there's a premium when you have very, very repetitive housing, like this is. You have to distract people by having extremely elaborate, expensive, and confusing site plans. Parking in the front, fronts facing backs, and so forth. If it weren't for the invention of GIS, you know what it used to be like to find an address. Impossible. Okay? This is one of our towns, one of our earliest towns is Kentlands. And you can see townhouses facing townhouses and mansions facing mansions. And it's on a grid. By the way, almost all the best real estate in America is on a grid. Almost all the worthless subdivisions are on curvilinear streets. Just something to, to remind you that it ain't the street that's going to happen. This is a very successful town. It's quite large, and it's complete now. Fully mixed use. Next. Another way, okay, this can't be read anymore. This is in Kentlands. This house at the time sold for $400,000. This townhouse sold for 118 feet wide, sold for 170,000. Our secretary, we have an office in Kentlands. 170,000 here, 400,000, and this rents for $500 a month. It's all here. This is actually the price of this thing. Developers would come to look at this corner and say, how'd you do that? How'd you get so many different incomes? And the answer was because all the architecture looks alike. It's the same brick and the same windows, okay? And they are actually highly compatible. Now, what do developers do now? They do exactly, here we have different building types, and you really should visit Kentlands. It's really incredible. You can't believe it wasn't around in 1920. Okay, so what did developers do? This is the same architecture, the different building types. What they do now is they use the same building type over and over again, the same lump of a house, the same lump of an apartment building, the same lump of a townhouse, but they ornament them differently. And they still, so much effort being wasted on gables and 6 materials in each house and on and on and on. And I keep talking to them. I say, why are you wasting so much money? Because you have to distract people from the repetition. And yet in the end, you still get accused of cookie cutter. But you say, I tried so hard. I had 7 different styles. All this. I drove 3 contractors bankrupt with all my little details of useless dormers. And cookie cutter. Well, why don't you do something? Why don't you calm down the architecture, completely calm it down, and actually intersperse different building types, because that is actually where variety comes. It comes not in style, but in different building types. I know that's a stretch to believe it, but we've built enough of these that it's true. Next. Okay, how do you make affordable housing compatible? You share the syntax. These are 14-foot wide townhouses next to quite large. This is a 5-window house. This is a 5-window house. This is basically hyper-affordable housing. The reason they're compatible is that they share exactly the same syntax. The same windows, the same pitch roof. That's the essence. It's exactly the opposite of what developers do. You should actually just settle on something. By the way, the most beautiful places on earth are not, with all due respect, in Colorado. Okay, where you have this variety. They're in Santa Barbara, they're in Santa Fe, they're in Charleston, they're in the western, in the great original cities, where they didn't have the money to import shit from all over the world to build their houses. They had shingles. Okay, sir, what choice do I have? Well, we have gray shingles, and then we have gray shingles that get darker when they're older. Okay? And we have one guy that makes windows, and they're white, and the mullions are 9 inches. And then you get Nantucket, and everybody loves Nantucket. And then you get Santa Barbara, which is all Mediterranean. Then you get Santa Fe, which is all the Santa Fe style. And then you get Monterey, and then you get Key West. Okay, there's nothing better than having a narrow range of syntax. The highest real estate value has the narrowest range of syntax. Oh, and the other thing, of course, I know is outbuildings. Okay, you really have to have this. Please allow immediately, tomorrow if possible, have an emergency meeting and allow additional dwelling units in the rear. Okay, because that actually is the first and easiest hit to actually start housing some of your younger people that are bothering you because they're living at home. And by the way, city after city now allows them. Toronto not only allows them everywhere as of right. Santa Barbara. Yes, I didn't know that. I know that Portland does, etc. So you're sitting here, okay, the very same people that say we have an affordable housing problem, don't you dare rent a room. Don't you dare have a building in the back. You know, it's the opposite. You can actually do an incredible hit. You know, now what you can't do is allow one person to do it. Somebody come in and says, I need a variance, you know? No, it has to be the entire zone has to have an argument. The way to do it is, by the way, don't do it for a zone, do it per block. Because then they compete with each other. Okay, we're only going to allow one block experimentally the next 2 years. Please, sir, can it be me? Okay, if you actually say, oh, we're going to force it, forget it, you'll never do it. You have to say, who wants to be the experimental block of the ADU? And then you'll see that you have an intelligent discussion, you explain it, you show them what it's like, etc. That is actually very, very helpful. There are lots of empty bedrooms in America that are not available because they're inside the house, violating the privacy of the family. You don't want to rent a room that's inside the house. You want to rent this, and this could be mother-in-law taking care of the kids. Next. 2 main streets. This one is actually a rendering that is trying to sell this. Come rent here. This is a rendering. Somebody actually, this is a come-on drawing. This is not a satire, okay, of what, you know, what a piece of junk this is. And one of the most hilarious things is that the poor draftsman was so bored that he actually drew a 6-wheeler and a pedestrian next to it.
And they don't know how to talk.
Okay, and everybody here is going out to lunch. The parking lot is empty because everybody has to go out to lunch, so there's midday traffic congestion. And it eats up your poor 1 hour for lunch. You know, you have to bolt a sandwich because you've taken 15 minutes to get to the lunch place, etc. So what's this? This place is called Princeton, New Jersey. These buildings were built in the 20s. People who work here come down. They have a choice of over 30 restaurants that you can actually reach within 5 minutes walk. They have the 35-minute lunch and they have extra time, and then they come back. They're both modern places that actually work. Everything about this is illegal, everything about this is expected, and the bankers don't recognize this, they only recognize that. Although that's changed a lot. And here I want to talk to developers, okay? The days when this is the only thing the bankers did is not true. They do tons of this now. You're just being lazy, okay? You're just going to the first banker you know, who's totally bored with everything, can't wait to retire, doesn't want to take risks. You can find lots of people to give you loans for this. Okay, and everybedy's doing it because these are being built all over the place. So here's another thing I have to say. When your developers here, your local developers say we can't get a loan, that ain't true. They can't get a loan with the first banker they find. I've already heard that. They can't get a loan if they expect to get it next Monday and not even dress up with a good suit. Okay? They've got to buy a suit and go somewhere where there's a banker sophisticated enough to give them a loan for this. Okay, the local schmo is not going to do it. There's nothing in it for him. He's going to do a shopping center. So actually, the developers who are willing to do this, give them lots of breaks because they have to try harder. But also don't believe that the bankers can't give them loans because all over America these things are being built. And the ULI, the magazine, has nothing but this on the cover. 1 month after another for the last 10 years. This is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do. If your developers aren't ready to do this, get new developers. You know, just have them sell their land to new developers that actually would do this because the demographics are superb here. They're superb. This is one of the richest towns. And they're spending $402 million a year off-site shopping. You know, going to Boulder and other places because there's not enough shopping here. I've never seen statistics like the ones we were shown yesterday. So this is possible, you just can't have lazy developers. Next. Leesburg, Virginia, totally mixed use. This is actually the printing press of a newspaper. This is a pub. There are many houses here. How is it that all this is compatible? Because they have alleys. The alley allows, this is the back of this building. See that building back there? This is the back of it. Alleys allow mixed use. Alleys allow workplace. Okay, the problem with workplaces where they make things and so forth, is that they're messy at the front. You can't have mess on the sidewalk. It makes it incompatible if you do it in the back. If you go to Colorado Avenue in Pasadena, one of the nicest places, just one street off, one of the nicest places in America, people are still making things. Lots of things, one street off, and it's because they have the alley, and actually this rough stuff spills out the back. So yes, you can actually bring that place, you can actually bring back your workplace, but you have to have alleys. Next. And, okay, well this is...
But that black book right there says an alley has to be a street. So now I'm building two streets for the same building.
You can't do that. An alley is a driveway. An alley's built at the standard of a driveway, not a street. If you say the alley has to be built to the level of a street, you'll bankrupt the developer. You'll never want to build an alley. The street is a street, the alley is an alley, you have the wrong book. Or what you have is a book that only has half its branch. It's lobotomized. It's got streets but not alleys. By the way, they exist. These books exist. You just need to buy them for your engineer. And then you need to pass them and make them official, which actually gets entirely rid of your liability and his liability. You can't get an engineer to say an alley can be built like a driveway because that's personal liability. But if it's passed as actually a municipal standard, the liability disappears. Other than the trip and fall stuff. But the engineer has no more liability. So they're not going to do it unless you pass the new standards, etc. Okay, next. Incubator buildings. Kelly Wright, I believe. Okay. This is how America starts. It starts with very inexpensive buildings. Think of Quonset huts, the equivalent, and storefronts. All these businesses come into play with very cheap. To start a business, you need cheap space. Okay. The United States, including Manhattan, started like this. So you begin as early as possible with cheap space. They're good for 10 years or 15 years, and you decant them into ever more permanent buildings. You will never incubate businesses if you expect new buildings built to the highest standards. It's too expensive. Most incubation takes place in old buildings that have lost their value. That's where it happens. But since you don't have any old buildings that are left, you need to build new buildings the old way, or very inexpensively. The CVS drugstores that you see out there, which are, have the steel columns, etc., they cost $35 a foot. Okay, with air conditioning. Nothing inside, but the cladding. That is very, very affordable. One of the things we're going to suggest is in one of the larger sites is to have a great number of these buildings, or a number of them, very inexpensive, that you can consider permanent or you can consider incubator buildings. The ideal is to keep them as incubators and keep decanting the businesses as they become successful, begin decanting them into businesses that can play proper. So you say, where has this been done? In all of our towns. In Seaside, that's how we started. The reason you can't see them is that they've been demolished by now. But that's how we began. And the people who first buy the real estate, they really like to have the stores. They don't want to wait for the climax condition. Oh, wait 10 years, wait 15 years. The argument here, there are not enough oh, we can't build retail, there's not enough rooftops. What do you mean there are not enough rooftops? Don't they have cars? Aren't people commuting half an hour to spend $402 million a year? Come on, it's so dumb. I don't want to hear that argument again. Okay, that's just too dumb to believe. Now the banker might say that, but he's asleep. Okay? Just look at the stats, propose that $420 million are commuting out at some effort to spend money elsewhere and see, this is a marvelous, marvelous place for commercial. And all the stats are there, why don't you believe them? Experts have done it. The ULI has said the same thing as our own consultant. By the way, also make simple buildings because they're mutable. They can change. If you make a building, such as you always do, that wiggles back and forth, it'll never be anything else because you can't attach anything to it. The old buildings that began as townhouses and become shops or become other things like this are always flat-fronted. By the way, the new buildings you're building downtown, the two new buildings you're building downtown, okay, your downtown has commercial buildings that are exceedingly simple. really just a box. Look at 24 carats. Okay, just tell me about that. It's exactly 13 feet high inside. It's a box. Okay, just replace the beams with open web trusses and build it again. $45 a foot. Okay, why are the new commercial buildings you're building downtown wiggling in and out and up and down and changing materials and having arcades? Like, what is it?
Look, that's why.
They're actually kitsch. They don't fit the downtown. What is causing developers to do the insanity of wiggling and shaking where the entire precedent are the simplest possible buildings? You know, what's up with that? But do not ask developers to do complicated, expensive things. It's not in anybody's interest. Look at what it's really like in the downtowns. I know that you're all friends with whoever built those two buildings, and you're probably friends with the architect or they're your cousin or whatever, but they're horrible. The two buildings, just don't do that again. Now, I can say, I know, I leave town. I leave town as the least popular person in Erie. But you know what? It's actually what I'm doing this week is indispensable. And you can't be both indispensable and everybody's best friend. It's incompatible. So my job, and the reason I'm actually well known for what I do, is that I actually tell it like it is. Try to find somebody else who does. Because it doesn't happen. But yet, you know, this stuff works because you can see the logic of it. This is what we want. Why isn't it happening here? Who is making things complicated? Next. Open space. This is a square in New Orleans that is beloved, incredibly well used, and it's the way open space is always designed that works. It's a certain size, it's got trees at the edges for shade, it's got sun in the middle, it's got grass, it's got pavement, and not much else. And the buildings in front it. The buildings in front it, giving it life. This is open space. Okay? It's not about more open space. There's tons of open space in America, there's tons of open space in Erie, but what it is the dribble that is left over after the houses are set. They're usually in people's backyards where they actually violate the privacy of the people who live there. Because your front is actually pretty resilient. The front of your house is set up for people, and it tends to be resilient. Your backyard is vulnerable, it's soft. It's where you're out there in your underwear making hot dogs. Okay, you don't want people looking in your backyard. That's where your junk is stored. And yet, the open space we allow is in the back. So when your code, as your code asks, I want more open space, okay? You have tons of open space. I've yet to see, it has to be open space that has a name, and the name is a square, or the name is a plaza, or the name is a parkway. Okay, they have names. Open space simply per quantity is not used, although it's very aesthetic and it makes you feel good, but it's not used. It has to be designed in known ways. This is open space. That's a square. They're totally different. Next.
I'll push back a little bit on that. I think you need to walk around some of the open spaces that we have in Erie.
The walkways.
And elsewhere on the Front Range.
Yeah.
People love them.
Yeah.
So, but I think your square is perfectly right.
You need both. Well,
but that open space, yeah.
but this is not a parkway. This is just, you see, this is not developed like yours, right?
Right. We do it better here.
Yeah. Well, actually, you are substantially more athletic than most people, I understand that. Most people are sociable this way. By the way, this is so popular that it has a fence, so they close it at night. Because otherwise, people are there all night. And not exactly the homeless either. Like people just, the neighbors are there talking all night and actually upsetting the neighbors, so it's got to have a fence. So part of the kit of what is a square often is actually just a fence that gets closed at night. Okay, next. This is a sidewalk that nobody uses, not even to come here. What's remarkable is how far people will actually fly to go to a place like Nantucket or Santa Barbara, and and not to play golf. Some places don't even have good weather, just to be able to walk. Okay, so what does the new urbanism do? it's developer oriented. By the way, smart growth was initiated by Governor Glenn. It's actually government led. New urbanism was developer led, private sector led. We want the same kind of place, we just explained it differently. So new urbanism came up when Robert Davis in Seaside confronted a waterfront piece of ground in which the only thing that was valuable was the view of the ocean. And the back was abandoned. And he said, can you make the back valuable? Right? And yet I want density. And you have to picture this when I do. Developers sell a dwelling, a certain number of square feet. But they also sell something else, which is called an amenity. Okay? It's not just the square footage. The amenity, the principal, there are amenities like golf courses and gated fronts and pools. But the principal amenity is the view or the large lot. Okay? The view or the large lot. The view is achieved by high rises, where you go up and you see the view, and the large lot is obviously as I described, views and large lots. It's one of the reasons. Okay. It's one of the reasons that, let me tell this differently. Views and large lots. What is it that we introduced? We introduced a third amenity, which is street life. Street life are units that have neither the big yard nor the view. You know what they have? The street. It's the street. When you look at our towns, the towns we've designed, in any traditional town, they don't have much of a yard and they certainly don't have any view. What they have is street life. If you create density without urbanism, you're creating a clearly inferior product. Because you neither have the yard nor the view. All you have is you don't have the street life. So basically, it's why garden apartments are so ridiculously undervalued. Because a garden apartment, what they have in front is a parking lot, and they don't have a private yard. So it's inferior. If you're going to build a townhouse, you need to build a town. I know you want to build townhouses. Yeah, you can sell a townhouse here, but it's much better if the townhouse is a town. Because if not, it's just a little yard and it doesn't have a view. So it's crucially important. It's not a joke. What we're designing here will have neither views nor yards in general. So if you do not permit the developers or people like ourselves to actually do real urbanism, if you cut across what it requires to do urbanism, such as intersection spacing and narrower streets, you will have an inferior product that actually will not be properly amenitized. It will always be less valuable than the big houses. And you'll always be less valuable than downtown Boulder. So this is crucial. You have to let us do a good job. We know exactly how to do a good job. We've done a good job many times. We have also much more often failed to do a good job. Okay, if you look at Prospect, we did Prospect 25 years ago. Colorado. Beautiful streets, retail doesn't work. Why doesn't the retail work? Because we got one entrance. How can retail work when you have, 35 shops, all of which happy to settle in with one damn entrance? It's a cul-de-sac, nobody knows what's happening inside. We knew this would happen. But Kiki Wallace thought it would be so great anyway that he did it. But we said, it ain't gonna work. We need more ways in and out. So what killed us was the Colorado DOT. What killed Kiki and what killed us was Colorado DOT. This can easily happen here. If I come back a year from now and you say, well, Andres, I'm sorry we really tried, but we couldn't get your street, well, fine. I'll write you a letter of how it will end. Okay, you can open it when the retail goes under. You can open the letter and say, damn, he was right. Okay, you don't have to call me. Because by now, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I know exactly what works and what doesn't. I know exactly how you're going to blow it. And I'm going to tell you ahead of time, in a written letter, when you try to blow it, I'll send you a letter you can open later. By the way, that's a very good technique to get you to do the right thing, because you'll open the letter early, and then you say, shit, he's right, okay? But I'm playing hardball. But really, don't you want to succeed? Okay, you really do want to succeed. So you gotta get serious about this. Anyway, Nantucket, all these places are wonderful. People just fly across the continent to be there. Next. What's wrong with garages? Okay, garages, you can get very nice garage doors, which actually people say, well, my garage doors are so nice. Did you know I spent $3,000 in my garage doors? That's not the problem. The problem is that the only information these houses give is that people live there. Cars live there, which is boring, okay? Cars here live separately, they're shacked up in this one, but that's it. There is no interesting information. In the same town, I've been here bored to death, I don't even walk, I just walk up and down the street because it doesn't get any more interesting. In this, every manifestation here says that humans are living here. There's a little vertical window where you can imagine a human being behind. There's a little stoop, there's a little entrance, there's a little picket fence with a gate, and so forth. Here's the secret of architecture. Architecture is not interesting. What's interesting is the manifestation of the humans who live in them. If you look at a building that has somehow on the top floor a really big window, and you know it's a penthouse, and you can see a terrace, and I saw several today in Pearl Street, and you say, God, yeah, it's so cool. Because you project yourself living there. You project yourself as a human in that tall space, in that deck. When you see a beautifully proportioned window, okay, you say, I love that building. You know why? Because you can tell it's a 9 or 10 foot ceiling. Because a window of that size can only happen in a 10 foot ceiling. And then you look at another one and you say, this is a shit building. And yet the shit building has really nice windows and little shutters and everything. That's a shit building. What happened? Because the window is ill-proportioned because it's an 8 foot ceiling. Now why is it an 8 foot ceiling? Because the idiot code said you can have a 35 foot house limit. You know what you do with the 35 foot height limit? You know what you're doing? You're crushing the ceiling height. You're crushing the ceiling. If you actually do the geometry, right, you can't inhabit the roof, it's 8 or 9, 8 or 9, 8 or 9, or you press it down so the house is sitting on the ground, so everybody's looking in the window, so the curtains are closed. You've got to give people the chance to get 3 foot high, their porch has to be 3 or 4 feet up, and then give them a chance for a 10 or 12 foot first floor, and a 9 foot second floor, and a 9 foot third floor, and then you measure what it is. Not some arbitrary 35 foot whatever it is measured in the middle of the pitch. You know what happens when you measure in the middle of the pitch? You crush the pitch. You even make that look shitty. Okay? The way to write a code is you say 3 stories. Go for it. No more. You can't do 3 stories, but if you know you want to make a 12 foot ceiling, go for it. 3 stories. Now you might control it immediately adjacent to the adjacent neighborhoods. But any modern code that knows what it's doing does not code by number of feet, it codes by number of stories, because you want to incentivize the tall stories. None of the facades I showed you that look good can ever be worked out with 8 foot ceilings. I can show you all day, you can't do it. You can have at least a 9 foot ceiling and a 10 foot ceiling, and then even the most elemental window is properly proportioned because it's a proportion of 1 to 2.5. And then it looks great. And then you don't have to spend any money on balconies and gables or any panoply of the bullshit you put on things, you know, which in the end is futile because it still looks shitty. Okay? Just do a box with beautifully proportioned windows and 10 foot ceilings, and it's much less expensive. It is your code that is causing, you know, the kind of neurotic architecture you're getting here. It's 8 foot ceilings desperate to look good, and all sitting on the ground and slab on grade. Your fault, not their fault. It's not the developer's fault. Okay, you got to fix that. That isn't that hard. Because you're not increasing the density. You're increasing the quality of the space. Next. Alleys, of course, can be very neat. They're best when they're messy. Okay, in Kentlands, we built a lot of playgrounds. The kids don't use the playgrounds. Why would you use the playground when you can use the alley? The garage door is open with all your father's toys. You know, couches and wheels and things. It's got puddles. And by the way, when you build an alley, don't gentrify it. An alley is supposed to be messy. Kids love it. And by the way, there's a species now on the wane called the male. Okay? The human male actually loves alleys. Because what they do, they socialize on the basis of things that happen in the garage. And if the garage is in the front, it has to be neat. Okay, that's where the old couch is, and the TV, and the thing that never gets reassembled, you know, what is there for conversation. Alley is male space, okay? And somebody has to say something for the poor guys. But it's also excellent for children. We have built neat alleys. They're not as good as the really messy alleys. Next. And then, okay, here's another thing. Please, all the expensive places have very, 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 very steady frontages. Okay, this is Georgetown. It could not be more expensive than this. Look at that, a box, 3 windows across, 2 windows across, etc. This, just tell me how this could be less expensive, because it isn't. It's impossible. Look at that. Which has the highest real estate value? All this does is point out how many of the same repetitive thing there is. It's so many, so developers say, oh, you're making me do things that cost more. Everything you do costs more. Everything. What's the flashing like up here? What's all the different trusses that don't even coordinate? Like how do you do that? I don't know how you do that. What about this? What about this little dribble? What about the cars in front? This is a socio-fugal space. You park and you go in. This is a socio-pedal space. You love to park half a block away. Pedestrians come here just to be there. And it's less expensive. Today this morning I visited some of your newest and best places. They're hysterical. Absolutely hysterical. And by the way, I'm not going to embarrass anybody, but dumbest thing I ever saw. Next. McMansions. Okay. Why do people like these? What you get from McMansion inside is absolutely fantastic. The American floor plan is a miracle of functionality. The carpets, the lighting, the refrigerators, the kitchens, the different places to have breakfast, lunch, dinner, and coffee, the gym in the master bedroom. I mean, they're fantastic. For the price, they're fantastic. It's all about the inside. The outside is very, very costly and actually very, very isolating because the house is designed independently. What the brochure shows you is a single McMansion that, because it's sitting alone, has to have all the roofs of an entire village and all the windows of an entire village. You never design a building alone because it's too much pressure on it. What you do, this is Kentland's, what you do is you actually draw very simple houses, but you always show them 4 at a time. You design them 4 at a time. You design them 5 at a time. And when the realtor comes to show this, if they drive there, they park here to go there so that the person can see, oh, I'm buying the whole street. And the variety, there's just as much variety here as there is in these 4 houses, but here it is shared among 4 houses, so they cost much less. Do you see how everything I'm saying actually costs less and makes more sense? And it actually comes free with urbanism. Now, one of the hardest things to do is to persuade developers who have committed to urbanism is to calm down the architecture. Okay, you've done it. You've got the square, you've got the tight street, cool it on the house. Just cool it. Like just, get rid of the gables, just a couple of materials, don't worry about it. So, but I want you to understand something about this. People love their suburbs. And they love because the interiors are wonderful. And the yards are often very good. But once they step outside, in the public realm with the streets, it's actually miserable. It's a hostile pedestrian environment where you're competing with your fellow resident. These two coexist. This has much higher value than that per square foot and overall. And all our projects sell for more, and they cost less. Next. And the other thing about the backyard, this is a typical American backyard. They're a little better now. There's no privacy in the backyard. So you need big lots, right? You need to put your back neighbor as back as possible. By the way, you're not even giving big lots here. This is not a good.
We need fences. That's
Yeah,
right.
you need fences. No, but it's really kind of weird because you have very big houses and very small lots. It's not the best combination, needless to say. So, you know how wide this is? 32 feet. Okay, so this costs more than that. in Florida. This is one of our projects called Windsor. So the people come in and they say, why are you asking for $500,000 for a 30-foot lot when for 2/3 of that I can get a lot 4 times the size? And they're pissed. They actually come in and say, how dare you? I've heard about you. How dare you actually charge so much? And so the realtor says, cool it and sit down here. You just sit down and look around. Can anybody see you? How private do you feel? Do you like skinny dipping? And they go, no. They really, I've seen them do it. You know, can anybody see you? That's true. Go back to the other one with the 4 times lot. Go to the backyard and say, can anybody see you? Yeah, actually 5 houses are looking down on me. Every one of your backyards here, as far as I can see, there are 5 houses. There are probably 24 to 30 windows looking down at your backyard. Like, why do you do that? Why do you do that when actually just thinking about the what's called the front building, the back building, and the outbuilding, because there's a garage back here. If you do them judiciously, the 32-foot lot is a palace. You know why? Partially because the code doesn't let you, but also because you haven't got the type. The type. You can visit many of our communities now that have this, and they outsell the big lots. The ULI is very disturbed by this. Next. The other thing about trees, okay? It's not about landscaping and quantity. This is actually ornamental. It's actually not ornamental. It's actually remedial. Everything looks so bad, you're going to throw money at it. By the way, you're not throwing enough money at your stuff. It doesn't look good enough to have such little landscape. You've got to at least ask for more. Okay? But what happens is these streets, a tree properly planted, not at the time of sale, of the first sale, but in 15 years, the value that actually a disciplined tree planting program does is incredible. A street like that. You know, it's not for you, but it's for the people who bought from you. And they actually, these are the great neighborhoods. They have the great trees. By the way, you have to know how to plant them. Most trees don't grow right. Next. This is traffic engineering. This guy, this is one of the older towns in Florida. This is the 5-foot curb radius. This fellow is coming down here and crossing a 20-foot street, and it's a 20-foot crossing, right? 20 foot. The car actually has to come up here, and because the turning radius is tight, the car actually has to slow down and really turn the wheel, right? With a 25-foot turn radius, the sidewalk, let's say this is a 20-foot street, the crossing distance is 40. You have doubled the crossing distance, and that little car is actually tilting from centrifugal forces. It's completely incredible. And you say, why don't people walk here? Because you've designed it so that the car can actually do that, and the pedestrian has to really wait. Because when you double the crossing distance, the approaching car has to be real far away before you get off the sidewalk. Is this legal? No. It's not in your book. They're going to tell you. And by the way, we will compromise this because we're not, you know, this is just the right thing to do. Sometimes we don't do it perfectly. But really, the 5-foot radius, and then you say, well, this doesn't work. And you say, how many, this is a 1920s neighborhood, how many moving vans do you suppose have made that turn? How many times has trash been picked up? Why do you think it doesn't work? On what evidence does it not work? How does it not work? And yet they tell you it doesn't work. But it's their manual that doesn't work. And they demand 15 and 20-foot radii. Well, you can do this, but it's not going to be first rate. By the way, this is a battle we almost always lose. But when you get it right, it's wonderful. This is when they'll just say, well, I've given you enough. It's got to be 25-foot radius.
You lose to fire.
What?
You lose for the fire.
Well, you can also get...
The fire department dictates it.
I know that. So what? Push back. I mean, what the...
Safety.
It's one guy.
Have you met the fire chief?
No, they're always like that. Fire them.
It's the life safety car thing.
I know. Which is why actually we compromise. But we don't always compromise. We're building stuff right now, you should go see it. I mean, you can say this doesn't work. What do you think? We haven't got fire chiefs when we do it right? You just have a different kind of fire chief. Okay, one that actually takes off his fire hat and says, I'm also a father. Okay, you know, when we do a charrette and the fire chief shows up, and the engineer shows up, and the cop shows up, you say, okay, you can say anything you want, but not in your function as a cop, but as a father. Because the minute you say something with that uniform, okay, it's not actually a discussion. You're just telling us how it is. So we know who you are. Tell us what you think as a father. Okay, what do you think about this as a father? Can you kid cross? And that's how we sometimes get there. But actually what you need also is a fire chief that knows what he's doing to talk to your fire chief. He's not going to listen to me or you. But there are fire chiefs that consult now to other fire chiefs. And by the way, the fire chiefs are also working in neighborhoods like that. What do you think? There isn't a fire engine in Gainesville? That's a huge college town too. But you see, get a fire chief from Gainesville, and here's what the answer is. He says, I have to go onto encroaching traffic to make the turn. That's the reason they do it. Because if you come here to make a right turn, you don't go into encroaching traffic. The left turn is no problem. It's the right turn. So you say, so what? Why do you have an engine that is red with lights and a bumper this big and a siren, if not the signal to get out of the way so I can encroach on you?
You have a ladder to reach 10 stories to go a 2-story house.
That's the other thing. They love the big toys. You can get a female fire chief too. You can try that. Because the boys actually buy the toys. It's true. I get it. I love fire engines. The width of the streets. This is if you guys have a 12-foot. If you have 12-foot lanes, two 12-foot lanes and two 8-foot parking lanes, that's 40 feet. Do you know what that adds up to? That adds up to 40 feet, right? 12, 12, and 8, 8. That's what it looks like. You like that? How is anybody going to cross that? Do you think that this child, this is in Kevin, would ever play in the street? By the way, kids love pavement. Maybe in Colorado they love nature too. But most kids love wheels. Okay? And this is a very, very slow people. And the mothers are all there, the parents are all there, the kids are playing on the street. And I love it when kids play on the street because this is actually, that's 10, 10, 7, 7. It's just 7 feet taller or less or 8. And by the way, entire cities, entire traditional cities, including Charleston, actually have 10-foot lanes and 7-foot parking lanes. And again, they have moving vans and fire engines and everything. So this is not actually required. This is just in your book, but you can rescind it. Okay, now, by the way, I want to say one thing. Remember, we're talking about 2 codes here. If you're going to build conventional suburban development, this is fine. That's what it's for. But the one we're building is not that. The one we're building is this one. This is what you asked us to design. If you want a town center, which is our job, you can't do it with 40-foot streets. You just can't. So you've got to really play your part and get rid of the big streets, or don't get rid of them. Add more standards to your public works manual. We're ready to do that as part of the deliverables. Next. Arterials that split things. Okay, this is Paris. This is a cafe. You would really like to be in that cafe. You fly there, it costs $1,500 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 lanes. That is a 12-laner in Paris. Extremely complexly understood. Okay, and it's got 6 lanes of parking. It's got 2 lanes of slow traffic, 4 lanes of fast traffic. This is what your boulevard should be like. Okay, it's got trees, it's got buildings, it's got cafes, it's got huge parking capacity. Oh no, in America, we do this. Huge centerline radii. This is a 4-laner you can't cross. This is a 12-laner people are having coffee on. Okay, this is, the tragedy of America is we have spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure, which instead of making our places better, has made them worse. We keep spending billions on places that create, on roads that create extremely hostile environment because the books are the wrong books. And right in front of us is this, at tremendous capacity. Why? By the way, there are American books that talk about this. They've been around for 20 years. All you have to do is download this stuff and say, we're going to do this. Next. The cul-de-sac is a ridiculous system, extremely expensive. Look at this, okay? So developers say, don't make us waste asphalt on streets. Okay, no, we got two-side streets. Look at this, okay? This is a lane, this is a street without any frontage whatsoever. No saleable frontage because it's an arterial. This is another arterial with no saleable frontage. This is a collector with no saleable frontage. The first saleable frontage is in here. Okay? Who paid for this stuff? Who's ever heard of a dumber, more expensive system? You can actually do the numbers. Here we did the numbers. And you can actually see how much you waste by having this system of collector, arterial, local, and cul-de-sac. Every street should have a frontage. Every street a building. You know? And just make avenues instead of collectors. Make boulevards instead of arterials. They both exist. Now, what we're proposing is that you have a double book. One of which says, guys, this is what we expect of you. Good luck. And the other one says, we expect the other thing. Next. By the way, the numbers, I can give you all the numbers. Another thing that happens is, when you waste money on horizontal infrastructure, you know, which is excessive pavement, there's no room for vertical infrastructure. There's no money left for vertical infrastructure. So the developers who have these completely crappy post offices have the widest, most expensive streets in the world. And people, you know, and you say, oh, come buy our real estate here. We have the widest streets. No, what they want to do is the vertical infrastructure. This is our gang mailbox at Seaside, built right at the beginning before there was anything around it. It sold hundreds of thousands of dollars in real estate, and basically it's the same budget. You can either spend it in horizontal infrastructure or vertical infrastructure. So when you actually make things cheaper for developers, don't just let them pocket it. Say, okay, so your street can be narrower. You know, we want all you can ask them to do things back. You know, with all the money you save, build a pool. You know, give it back to the people, but give it back to the people in such a way they can really use it. They'll be happy to do that because the pool sells more. No development has ever said, oh, by the way, we're better because our streets are wider. That just doesn't. You know, you can say, well, we have bigger trees. Yeah, that'll sell. So in other words, you have to learn how to trade. Say, yes, you're going to save a lot of money on horizontal. And the way to think about it is that both vertical and horizontal infrastructure have to be in the same package. You can't specialize and actually and say, well, streets are one thing, talk to the traffic engineer, and parks are something else, talk to our landscape department. Okay? Because the money you save on this goes to that. It's both infrastructure. So get the departments together and actually learn to do the pluses and minuses. Next. So why do we do this? Old people who can't drive to their daily needs but can walk until they're very old. We actually don't need retirement communities when you build neighborhoods. Children who can't, by the way, I know you love your playing fields, but has any kid ever walked to your baseball field? Or what about the parking lot I keep hearing about that isn't possibly large enough? Why'd you put them all in one place? So that for janitorial convenience? That some coach, so you don't have to hire two coaches? Like, what's up with that? Why do you put them all in one place? That's just an industrial facility, sorry, but it's what why not, you know, you should have pick up baseball. This is what's fun. So when we make little baseball fields, and by the way, you don't even have to do the baseball field, let the kids do it. Just make spaces available for the kids to figure it out. Next.
But the town makes a lot of money off running tournaments on that program.
Yeah.
It's tournaments, it's people coming from someplace else.
Yeah. Well, then it makes more money with the hotel.
A lot of money.
No, I'm not sure it's a lot of money, but they also make a lot of money other ways. Your coffers are apparently pretty full. The cops that walk instead of cars. Remember the old slim post office people? Next. And here's the real tragedy: is that the houses are often. By the way, there are these kids that can't afford housing, but they need to have cars. Do you know how much a car costs, according to AAA? Over $9,000 a year. Between replacement cost and insurance cost and gasoline and everything, $9,000. At 10%, that pays for a $100,000 mortgage. So now you're asking developers to cheapen the housing. oh, let's save a little money here, let's have more plastic this, you know, whatever, make it smaller to save a few $1,000s, and yet you're forcing every adult to have a car that costs a minimum of $9,000 a year. Not my number, AAA number. Okay, and that in a mortgage, again, I repeat, the $9,000 buys $9,000 a year buys $100,000 worth of mortgage. That's where the money goes. And so you see this pathetic situation, or a pathetic house with a bunch of pathetic cars, you know, both of which are decrepit. But do you think they're having fun having 5 decrepit cars? They need the decrepit cars because we haven't created any alternative for being there. And of course, spending our time commuting is the greatest waste in the world. We have very little free time in America. The labor movement worked a century to get us down to the 8-hour day, and the planners have thrown it away by asking us to commute 2 hours a day. You see, what I mean, our free time, which is between work and housing, has been thrown away. And there is no alternative. Okay, let's talk about this place that doesn't have jobs here. You have actually consigned every resident of this place, or at least 95% of them, to commuting. So what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about getting the shops back here? Next. Anyway, we're back to this last slide. And the last thing which we weren't expecting is that actually urbanism is actually the greatest thing you can do ecologically. Because tailpipe emissions is, I think it's 26% of the problem. So all this kind of churning that goes on with straws and little things that you're supposed to do, every mile that people don't have to drive. And by the way, it's not about transit. It's just shorten the drive. Shorten the drive to work, shorten the drive to the shops, and that has a tremendously positive effect on the environment. When the urbanism started, we didn't know anything about tailpipe emissions, but it's really huge. And you can actually promote that. By the way, it's still not properly recognized how much the cars do. And they just think, well, the cars have to be more efficient. And how many people say, well, what about not driving? You can't say not driving, but you can say, can you drive shorter? That's all we can easily achieve a shorter drive. If you've got the supermarkets at the edges, okay, if you bring a supermarket in, yes, you still have to drive to it, but you've cut the drive by 2/3. So you can actually bring things together. It's not just about walking, it's about sharing. And in the end, by the way, there's another thing that's coming up now that is incredibly well documented, social isolation. You know, the fact that people are not actually, particularly the older folk, they're highly isolated. It's because the car is an isolation machine. You know, your neighbor, instead of conversing, your neighbor is your competitor for asphalt. Ooh, that guy. He's going to take my parking spot. I better dislike him as soon as possible. You know, that's not the way to actually run a society, but that's actually what we're building. And a lot of the trauma that we're going through has to do with that. Anyway, that's the last slide. Thank you. I haven't given this talk in about 5 years. It used to be better. Any questions? By the way, I was asked this question. I used to ask this question. I was asked this question. Did I say anything that wasn't accurate? What?
I don't think you can go for $35 a foot, pretty much.
I just spoke to a client that built for, actually he said 25 to 31.
Yeah, not here.
Well, maybe not. But, well,
Just for shell.
No, but let me say what I'm talking about. Well, that's the number I used to give, and he corrected me. Then I'll give you his name. And what he said is you can't use local crews. What happens is CVS is not built by a local crew. It's built by a species of spacemen that come from somewhere that has nothing to do with the local labor market. And they're the people that actually build it. And that's what he told me. He says it's not, you don't get the local contractors to build it. Because I'm talking about just big boxes. But he actually told me 25 to 31, which I didn't believe. So I do think it's 75. But still, for a 16-foot space, it's pretty good. Right. Yeah, I agree. Yes, sir.
You made the comment about failure ratio of 6 to 1.
Yes.
Did you go back and looked at what has caused?
Yes. Yes. Much of it is not interesting. It's personal. It's partnerships that broke up. Many, many projects are flipped. They actually get the permits, they plump them up, and then they flip them. That's the highest mortality rate is for people who have an exit strategy of selling the project. What happens when you sell the project is that usually a lot of the profit is drained and it can't be built right. You know, they have a long list of those. That's the main mortality. Sometimes the partners haven't gotten along. The recession was mortal danger, was what killed a lot of projects.
How about the book?
Which one?
Is that?
That goes in.
Oh, yeah.
That goes along?
Yes, actually what happens is what also kills the project is when people say, well, we have this problem, and we're not gonna tell them about it because we're embarrassed. He's gonna get pissed at us. So they don't call me to give the explanation. And so they actually, a lot of places just say, well, we can't talk to the client. And so basically, sometimes they hold too hard a line or too soft a line or something, and they just go under because they're not consulting properly. That happens a lot. Because I set a very high bar. By the way, our clients are Marines. It's really hard to be a DPZ client because, you know, we tell it like it is. We spend a lot of money educating you, and we set very high standards. So the dropout rate is very high. You can get a lot friendlier planners that say, oh, shucks, it's all right. They smile. I rarely do.
Is Kentland still on the original developer?
The original what?
Developer?
Kentland's the developer lost Kentland's, but they never stopped building it the following way. 2 projects were lost this way. Kentland's, I forget the numbers exactly, had a shopping mall, 70 acres. It was something like 380, 70 acres for the mall. The mall was going to drive Kentland's, the sale of the mall. And they had a buyer who was Campo, remember, that's Allied or whatever, one of these guys, he was a raider, and he had bought the mall. And so Joe Alfondre had the money to build it and started building. Campo did funny stuff in Canada, went under. Joe never stopped paying. You know, he could always pay, but he knew the project couldn't make it without in those days it was only 17 million, like the mall site was only 17 million. He couldn't make it without having sold the 17 million. So we went around to other developers, Simon and all the others, to actually see if they would buy it, but they didn't because it was the recession. Because remember what Campo did is he actually killed a bunch of department stores, like Allied department stores and stuff. And so what happened, he never found a buyer, so he kept going. But in the end, because he couldn't make it, he gave it back to the bank on the condition that it be finished properly. And so a fellow at the bank took it over and built it perfectly. And so that's what happened. But it was just the third fist got it. The other project was, that went back to the bank.
That developer didn't get the yacht.
He did
Like
not,
a
no.
lot of the other developers don't
Right.
get the yacht.
Yeah. Well, the bank got the yacht.
The dumb ones, the dumb bankers.
Right, no, but what happened was, listen, don't talk, the third fist can get you too. It's always a third fist. It's like, buzz. I didn't know my partner was a drunk.
Yeah.
That's another one. We did a wonderful project in Chico, the partner was a drunk, so that killed that project. What can I do? Okay, but there's another one that's really interesting, which is what happened back in the recessions of 95 and later is that the banks actually wanted to take back the good projects, not the dying ones. And so we had a spectacularly good project called Newtown Lake Charles. You can see it. And the developer kept paying. He was still selling 70 houses a year. And the bank said, because the bank started going under, the bank just had the right to take it back. He did. And so it was most unfair, but because bankers are fundamentally stupid. Okay, I'm sorry, but they are, okay? And what they did is they didn't know what to do with it. So Joe was able to buy it back at pennies on the dollar later, because the bankers just let it sit. And so that project's doing fantastically well, and that's about 4,000, 5,000 units. And that's beautiful. But basically, their loss, they probably, I don't know. Look, we have 45 built projects. Like, what do you want to focus on? They're amazing. If you drive, you take 65 from Chicago to New Orleans, you can visit 8 huge, beautiful projects. This isn't 1980 in which you're taking a risk. Okay, you get it. This isn't the ULI. This is bullshit. It's not even dangerous anymore. But if you find a banker that doesn't give you a mixed-use thing, how can you not get a loan for this stuff? Everybody gets a loan for this stuff. You're just not trying. I know you're not, because other clients right now are getting loans. So don't tell me you can't. No, you have to. So I'm just putting it out here. You can get loans. Just wake up in the morning and get it. Or build your same old shit with this code. I'm not preventing that. Good luck. Yes.
How many of the 300 and how many of the 45 are the size of the
The ideal size is about half the size of this. Okay? Because there's something wrong with owning too much land that you're carrying. Sometimes the developer owns too much land, and he's not going to get to it for 15 or 20 years, and it's draining him. I don't like big projects, because the carrying cost is too high. Okay? I prefer about 120 acres. Also, there's a kind of problem where scarcity doesn't kick in. At some point, sales and appreciation goes because there's enough houses. And at 240 acres, it's hard to get into the scarcity. That's another problem. Why are you so interested in I mean, people don't normally ask these questions, so they're good. I have not done a record as to what. I remember the painful failures. I think there are others that I don't.
systems engineer for space systems, and so I just asked questions.
Projects in California never get built. We've probably done 6. The only one that's ever been built is called Playa Vista. And that developer went under before it was built. McGuire Thomas. Yeah, we did that. And it was built because of sequential lawsuits. It was actually permitted. McGuire, but all they got in California, they had to have a sequential lawsuits. One lawsuit after the other, even after the permits. And so eventually the guy went under, and then Goldman took it over. So that's a different California. But by the way, when I get a new project in California, I don't take it seriously. I honestly, I'm disclosing this because I don't think it's going to be built. The NIMBYs are too strong.
How often have you run into a community like this where they zone one piece, they zone another piece, they zone a third piece, and they said, well, let's make every piece compete for exactly the same thing because we want a town center, we just don't know who's going to do it. And now you are trying to figure out how to put 3 pieces back together for a town center.
Okay. Actually, one of the things that is often a problem is everybody wants to build the same thing. This isn't the case here. There's some people there that want lots of townhouses. Some people want apartments. Some people want retail. Some people want big houses. That's not a problem here. It's really nicely diverse. That's not a problem. It's just, I didn't focus on this, but when I look at the houses, townhouses, and apartments, it's really easy. And by the way, there's something I'm not going to particularly push now, which is one of the great difficulties is putting apartments over retail. Like the people who own the corner, whatever, they haven't come in yet. Okay, Regents. We're not going to put apartments over their stuff because that's hard. Yes, it can be done. They're probably a REIT of some kind that doesn't like to do. They only like to do one thing, and so we're not counting on apartments for that, frankly, because they just don't do it.
They do shopping centers.
They do shopping centers. Some people do rentals. I'm very grateful for that. Some people do townhouses. That's great. Somebody does tiny houses over there. That's all right. The balance is really all right. I don't think there's anything difficult about this. There's nothing difficult. If we could just if everybody would agree to get the streets to connect properly, and follow some rules, it should be very easy to do. By the way, the hardest thing to get is a strong. So there's another Hills project. There's some very weak markets in America. You don't think Montgomery, Alabama is a strong market? You see what I'm saying? Like we have 3 projects in Alabama. They're all uphill. Because that's not where people are moving to. And that's a killer.
And why do they have you come in and make some money?
Because it's the only hope to sell anything. Because it's different. There's a lot of competition that's chasing for the You know, that's chasing for the bottom, that's what it is. By the way, our Alabama projects, because they have to compete, are totally gorgeous. That's a paradox. If you want to see, who are your 3 most beautiful projects? Oh, they're in Alabama. Why? Because they have to try harder. It's a paradox, you know. And by the way, since some projects get very long-term, you know, projects do like this too. When there's 30-year build-outs, when the going gets easy, the quality drops. When you know, when the economy is really good and people are looking for housing, they don't have to try so hard. And they stop, it just drops. And then when it's tough, they try harder. There's also, okay, here's another kind of project that fails. We've done university towns. There are many towns that don't, there are many universities that don't have towns. Because they, you know, it was the old model of being in the countryside. The kids don't like that anymore. They want to be in towns. So universities normally have a lot of space for expansion, right? You know. And what happens is, but they're imagining suburban campuses. So we do a campus master plan, grab their suburban stuff and say, look, you can triple the density of your dorms and then be like more like a real university instead of spread out. And look, we've liberated 100 acres. Build a town there. That works really well until the president changes. And then the next president, somehow, for some reason, it's not his project, doesn't care about it, sells it to some developer, loses quality. You know, so that's happened a couple of times. The university town with the president. I should make a list.
What do you see as the build-out?
What?
You've been trying to get.
Oh, sorry, man.
Get your attention.
I feel like I'm only citizen here. When you mentioned on a couple of slides like Sonoma and Princeton and things, these are illegal. What's illegal about it?
That the code does not envision. For example,
Okay.
that road in Princeton connects New York City to Philadelphia. It's not a minor road. Okay, it opens like that, and yet when okay, I should actually say this kind of important. Modern traffic engineering keeps the same section. If it's a collector, it never stops being a collector. No matter what it's crossing, it just reams through everything. An arterial reams through everything. The old way, actually, you had a country road that then became a suburban road that then became an urban road. So this road that goes through Princeton was New York to Philadelphia, and it has different sections. When it enters Princeton, it actually acquires parking, sidewalks and buildings, as you saw. What's illegal is parking on a collector. What's illegal is the buildings that close.
Okay.
What's illegal probably is that they don't have enough parking.
So to make it legal, the code has to change
Yeah.
for those areas.
To allow
And
that.
who in Erie is responsible for changing the codes?
Okay.
The citizens vote on that?
There's two kinds of codes. There are health and safety codes that you can't
Right.
change.
Right. But-
And by the way, they increase them every decade to make everything ever more expensive, but you can't change it. So you're spending a lot of money now on God knows what.
Right.
Okay, start with sprinklers, excessive electrical,
Yes.
you know, all this stuff.
Keep
Uh,
stepping.
You can't change that.
Right.
The other, what you can change is the setbacks, the heights, all sorts of things, and that's 100% in the
And
hands
who
of.
within our town gets to
Well,
decide
there's the
that?
planning department who is exceedingly sympathetic, which is why we're here.
Mhm.
And then there is the board of trustees, many of whose members are sympathetic also.
Okay. And
And
the citizens don't vote on any of these changes?
the citizens can actually obviously have a say, yes.
Okay. I was just
Yeah.
curious, because people that have bought things and they know they're next to a retail space, but they know that the retail space is only supposed to be, say, so high. And if you're 35 foot versus 3 stories, people always want to push the limit, so 33 stories could be 50.
Well, we can limit it.
Well, that was just my question.
Yeah.
Who gets to decide that sort of thing? The person that bought the property thinking, okay, it's only going to be 35, or the town council says, you know, we can handle 50.
Well,
That's just curiosity.
okay, well, that's actually very, very important. So let's talk about process. You want to hear about public process too?
Yes.
Okay.
Question, yeah, works.
Okay. shall I put it? There are countries that build fantastic things. Among them, Australia. And you go visit Australian cities, and an American planner goes and says, how'd you do that? How did you put the school in the right place every time? You know what I mean? How'd you do it? And they said, because you in America don't know how to run a democracy. What you do is you incite small mobs to come in. And he says, what you do in America is you actually call the neighbors within, I don't know, 1,000 feet or 300 feet, whatever it is. And he says, those do not represent, we understand. You think those are the citizens. This is, they're not the citizens. That's a specialized group, they're the neighbors. They don't represent the citizenry as a whole. Okay, what we do in Australia is we use the jury pools to get a completely random sample. We bring them in, and they represent the citizens as a whole. Now the neighbors come in, and they have a lot, they can speak all they want, but we know that they're neighbors. So the citizens as a whole, the 200 citizens, by the way, the citizens are asked to come in like in the jury. 600 come in, 200 asked to volunteer, and they have to come in, the 200. And so in the public hearing, the neighbors come in and says, I'm a neighbor, okay? And people, instead of saying, I'm a neighbor, therefore they have more say, they say, that's a specialist. Well, of course they're going to say no to the school, because it's traffic. But then there's a big bunch of people who represent the city as a whole that says, wait a minute, this is the right place for a school. Like, this is the right place for a town center. And so the elected officials have a cover, and it is actually much more democratic. And they have absolute contempt for our public process in this country, the professional planners. They said, you guys don't know what you're doing. What are you doing? The closer they are, you give them more credence. What you're doing is you have a tyranny of tiny minorities. It's actually, the closer they are, the more specialized they are. And actually they represent least the public good. They're representing their personal good, and we understand that and you don't.
So this town center is,
For
what we're
everybody.
looking at for right here
Yeah.
is this property
Yes, it's,
described here.
yes.
And is this process leading Erie to deciding this is how we want all of any future developments in Erie?
No,
to
with,
grow?
only with this,
It's only this
It's only here,
section?
yeah.
Okay.
which is unique and
It
unreproducible.
could be so
Yeah.
wonderful that others follow.
Yeah,
But
well, that would be nice, but, so when we say, look, and by the way, there's also something, our plan is going to, if you have a house that's 35 feet, you can be sure that what we put up against you is a house at 35 feet. What you're going to confront is the house at 35 feet. And then after that, it might go up to 45 feet, which is actually imperceptible. You can't tell 45 and 35. You can tell ugly and not ugly. A lot
well,
easier.
only if it comes to
Yeah.
you, which is important.
But it won't, because actually what we will do is we do drawings that show you, if you're standing here, and this is the view, the tall buildings over there doesn't alter your angle at all. So we actually do demonstrations of that.
Okay.
And by the way, I'm very honest. If it's going to cover your view, I'm the first one to tell you. I'm going to say, everybody, you see everybody on this street? See this street here, right here? Okay, everybody in that street is going to have the view covered. So you come in and oppose the project. I'll tell you that. And I say, and by the way, all you people who live over here, your traffic's going to get worse. Yep, it's going to get worse. You better come in and vote against it. You know why I do that? Because you're going to say it anyway. So I might as well let you know that I'm not bullshitting you. And furthermore, it also actually calms you down, because if you stand up endlessly saying, in the public hearing, everybody stands up and says, the traffic's going to get worse. And the next person's going to come up and say, the traffic's going to get worse. And the next person will say, I said that. I started with that. Okay? I know it's going to get worse. I told you. And then I'll give you reasons why it's going to get worse, such as it's always going to get worse. And what's more, it's going to get much worse unless you have walkable neighborhoods. So I'll give you that, but I'm not going to say it's not going to get worse, because it's bullshit. It always gets worse. Every day of your life, it's going to get worse. laughing because it's true. But I'm very straight with people. And then actually what happens is the people who think I'm a liar actually talk to me later and say, really, is how your worse? I say, yeah. But you know, there are compensations. You know, which you're going to be able to walk to things. You're lucky to be close to this place. Actually, your real estate value is going to get a lot higher because you're closer. That's actually good. So, you know, we have a talk. We can at least talk. But this idea that you come in and say, well, wait a minute, we're doing numbers, and you make a 3-hour presentation of the traffic and whatever, bullshit. Traffic's going to get worse. Everybody knows it. Just say it. Get it over with. The public process is extremely broken in this country. It's close to being, you know, most of our clients now don't even do a public process. What they say, all the public or private clients say, they just wakes up sleeping dogs. You know, let me just talk to the people, make decisions. I'll talk to the elected officials. I'll talk to the regulators. I'm not going to have a public process at all because it's nothing but NIMBYism. And
I'm probably back on that because this is part of our public process.
Yeah, but you're public, I'm working for the public sector. This is the public sector. But to my surprise, the private sector is off this gig, which is kind of interesting. You know, we're not doing this anymore. But this is clearly public. I'm here actually 9 hours a day talking to you at maximum energy. And by the way, telling you all the truths. By the way, equally, right? The developers got nailed, the residents get nailed, the architects probably not enough, but they should be nailed because they're doing a horrible job. You know, the wonderful people who are developing downtown are doing terrible buildings. Okay, it's just like, but my role is to actually tell it like it is, and which is a very difficult one.
How is all this going to affect Old Town Erie? The old mining town that was built with really no regulation at all.
That's the first question I asked. When I came in and I said, okay, the opposition is going to come from the merchants downtown, okay, who are going to...
I don't mean just the merchants, but the housing. I mean, it's nicely laid out, but you've got really an esoteric mix of housing.
Okay, that's a different question. Let me answer the first one. Okay. I think you should be worried about the merchants downtown. Okay? And I said, why aren't you worried? It was my first question. And the answer was, we're leaking $402 million. $407 million are leaving town, right? Because there's not enough stuff downtown. So it's not like, I don't think we're going to cannibalize downtown.
No.
I think we're going to intercept. Now, the second question is more interesting. What is devaluing your downtown? We're going to revalue your downtown because what we do looks a lot more like the downtown. Okay? You know, that has often happened before. What devalues your downtown is your suburban pattern. Everything about your suburban pattern says, you know what it says? The McMansion says, you are so out of date. The way you're growing, you realize every new subdivision that doesn't look like downtown is telling downtown you're out of it. We don't do this, you know, we look big and our parking's in front. Our stuff is going to validate it because it's going to look a lot more like downtown. But by the way, not nearly as small, and this was not a rich town.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. I would like to, somewhere else, not here, do a low-density subdivision that is primarily single and 2 stories that looks a lot more like downtown. I think that would be very interesting, actually.
What about a bridge over East County line to connect, a pedestrian to connect it?
Day one in planning school, they show you a film with a bridge. And below it are dozens of people crossing the traffic because nobody wants to climb the bridge. And say, don't do bridges, is what they tell you. But there's some exceptions. For example, if the entire system is upstairs, like it is in Minneapolis, you know, and I think a place in Texas, when you're upstairs already, you will take bridges. But when you're down and you have to go up and over, you won't. But you know, that's only 2 lanes. You know, county line is 2 lanes. there is no smaller street. You know what makes it seem hostile? Is the fact that it has no parking, it's got big setbacks and parking lots. So it signals, go fast. And it signals to the pedestrian, you're not supposed to be here. What we want to do at the intersection, because we're going to cross it just once, what we want to do at the intersection crossings is actually neck it down just at that point and alert the drivers that pedestrians are crossing here. You can go fast later and before, but not here. Here we're crossing. And you can signal that. And on top of it, we hope to get a traffic light, which of course then makes it perfectly safe. But you know, when I first saw it, I said, this is a monster road. And then you were there when I said, damn, it's only 2 lanes. It's only 2 lanes. So yeah, it's very crossable. But if you wanted to do surgery for about half a mile, it's not worth it. You could make it crossable. It's really not worth it. But at that one spot, probably 100 feet, we're going to make it crossable. People won't even notice they're crossing it. It's only 2 lanes. What else? Yes, sir.
Using your 2-page code, how long do you see the road?
This doing what?
How long do you, what would it take to build it? How many years?
I can't tell you that yet, because there's going to be at least one recession. It's inevitable, right? And that probably holds things up for 3, 4, 5 years. But you know what? You could take 2 years just to get a permit the way it is now. And hopefully when we're done, half a year from now, I'd like to see all these guys permitted. You know, the 4 main developers, just go. Do it, start.
So Andres, we've got another, do we have another session tonight? We've got one advertised to start at 6:30.
This was just a rehearsal for that.
The evening sessions have been kind of informal, give and take, talk with the individual developers. Is that what we'll have more of?
I think so. You know, there's a feel for the meeting. I actually put out some effort on the codes because the mayor is very into the code. This was really for her. I said, this is a chance. This is what I would have had to tell her, but I'm doing it publicly. So because she was here, she's not listening to this. I said, this is, you know, so I'm going to do a big deal, a big wrap on the code. Tonight I'll show the plan.
Okay. I don't know how many, it's a Friday night.
I know that.
This may be the hot item in town, I don't know.
I already know that. It is.
We'll see how many people show.